Hey, welcome to Full Time, presented by Amazon Business. I am Tamerra Griffin, and I am so excited about this episode because we will be discussing the U.S. Women's National Team's California doubleheaders against Brazil. If you recall, that first one was on Saturday, a 2-0 win at the fantastic SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. The second, a 2-1 loss at PayPal Park in San Jose. As you can imagine, there is a lot to unpack there. What is the core of this team that Emma Hayes hopes to form by June? What was the impact of Trinity Rodman's return to the national team? Who else stood out to us? It's too much for one person, and even two, because of course I'm joined by my co-host Meg Linehan to discuss. So we brought in a third, Jeff Rueter of The Athletic. But first I got to give some love to my co-host Meg. How's it going?
I mean, I feel like I have a distinct advantage just because I got to go home after the LA game. To be fair, I had a nice 7-hour layover in Detroit.
Ooh.
On my
I didn't
first
know it was
flight
that long.
did not go as planned because flights to
That
Burlington,
layover.
not that popular. So you have to wait. Fortunately, I was a little concerned I was going to get stuck in Detroit overnight, but there's a late night flight from Detroit. So got home. I will say the East Coast viewing time, rough. We have to give props to you for being awake so early after a very late night at PayPal Park. You know, we had a good time in LA though.
We really did. We had well, you had a burrito, I had
I did have a
tacos. We caught up, we enjoyed the sun, we experienced SoFi for the first time. That was a great game too. Alyssa Thompson was popping off in her hometown. Lots of core memories, I would say, actually. But yeah, I think U.S. Women's National Team After Dark is very different from NWSL After Dark. Though, if you are familiar with the latter, you're kind of primed for the former.
I mean, to be fair, it's USA Brazil in NWSL anyway, so it carried over. I do think, that game started, Kat Macario scores that goal, which obviously needed review, and I do think everybody was like, well, this is going to be a weird game. All right.
100%. And honestly, there was a part of me that wanted the goal to be called back just to maintain the chaos a little bit longer. But little did I know, goal or no goal, the chaos was gonna come. These two teams have so much history. We knew from how crunching and aggressive that first match was. For Brazil to lose again, that they were gonna bring it, and that much more the second we got that. And there's a lot to discuss in terms of how the U.S. prepared for that, how they responded, who stood out to us. And we will get into all of that, of course, with Jeff. But before we do, make sure, if you're not already subscribed to the Full-Time newsletter, that you are, because that is where we post stories that we've been publishing on The Athletic. That's where we continue conversations that you will have heard on this podcast and the two others, if you are not aware of those. On Mondays and Fridays now, you have Julian Sakovits hosting Full-Time Review and Full-Time Focus, going over all the water cooler conversations, the highlights from the previous weekend, what to look forward to in the upcoming weekend, whether it's the NWSL, the WSL, the U.S. Women's National Team, and beyond. And of course, you will still always have Meg and I chopping it up, going deep on certain topics on Wednesdays, like we're doing right now. And if you can't get enough and are not doing a social media cleanse, we are, of course, on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, with all the things. We took a really cute selfie at SoFi. If you haven't seen it yet on Instagram, make sure you're following us at TA Fulltime. Maybe one day we'll tell the story of how we talked our way onto the field in order to do that photo. But hopefully you can see that through the joy in our faces. I love that pic, Meg.
It's so good. It's so good. Also, you can't tell, but at least one cast member of Ted Lasso is directly behind us. So just know that that's a little Easter egg for that photo.
Yeah, and if you have any guesses as to who it is, feel free to DM us with your thoughts. All right, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Jeff Rueter so we can break down these two friendlies against Brazil. All right, it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. And by nitty-gritty, I mean the U.S. Women's National Team's two friendlies against Brazil. The first on Saturday in Los Angeles, a 2-0 victory, and the second, a 2-1 loss at PayPal Park in San Jose. In order to do that, because as you can imagine, there's a lot to unpack, we've invited friend of the pod, Jeff Rueter. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. And how are you doing?
I'm all right. It's a doozy when they kick off in that West Coast late night time slot. Your whole rest of your week is just trying to grip onto reality again. So we're here. Maybe this podcast will help. Maybe it'll make it harder. We'll find out.
Yes, this is like the journalistic pain cave, I would say, spanning the different time zones. It's been a lot, but we're doing it together. All right, let's get into this. Meg, I'm going to start with you. Can you share with me, and we can maybe focus a little bit more on the most recent game, that 2-1 loss. What stood out to you the most in that game in sort of a headline sense?
I would say just the complete tactics optional approach, it felt like. I mean, there was a lot of running. I posted on Blue Sky, this is two teams punching each other in the mouth a whole bunch. And, I enjoy games like that, but this doesn't really tell us anything about really the state of either team. It was just pure, friendly chaos. And, I do think this is where I think the LA game was maybe a decent check-in. This game really just felt like get a whole bunch of kids, a lot of experience playing against Brazil. And I think that was accomplished, but did we really get stuff out of this game? I don't know.
Yeah, producer of the show, Thea Lloyd Hughes. I will forever be thinking of Sonnet and the Kids to the tune of Benny and the Jets. But Jeff, I'm curious. This was an extremely young, the youngest starting 11 in 24 years for the U.S. women's national team.
Yeah.
To what extent do you think that might have contributed to the chaos that Meg has described?
Yeah, I think that you saw, and it's not even just the youngins, it's also inexperienced players at this level who've been playing for the club, like Mandy McGlynn, right? But you just see this is my chance, and this is my tryout, and either I need to nail the choreo and I need to hit the notes, or I'm going to be sent home and they're never going to bring me back again, right? And it's just a very tense sort of resulting dynamic. You see a lot of decisions that it's I don't see them do that player do that in the NWSL, right? And part of it is they're grasping a new tactical system, which is why you have to bring in these players. I totally agree with Meg. The back-to-back playing the same opponent, and we've got two more of these coming up right quick, right? So it's frustrating in some sense because I don't know how much you really do. I understand the argument that it's you limit the control, the variables only vary so much. You have the same opponent, and so you can get a decent read on a bigger number of players in your pool. But what ends up happening is that these second games, if Brazil lost, they're going to want to win, and they're going to do whatever they need to do to win. And that's good. That's a challenge, but at the same point, it doesn't always resemble a game of soccer. You have just kind of an instant grudge match vibe. I don't know. I don't think that we really could glean as much as I hoped to with all of these young players because they are still all being thrown in and thrown into new combinations that they've never played with these teammates in these roles. And then on top of it, you have an opponent who has been given so much license to just even Emma Hayes even called it ahead, right? This is going to be a game of duels, right? Which is just a very nice way to say make sure your shin guards are properly positioned.
100%. I mean, Emma has been, ever the poet. One word that I've heard her say that is not at all related to the game across the two matches was heat. References to heat. References to, saying, I want to, throw players into the kitchen and see who can handle the heat. She mentioned that in the first game, in the first half, she asked Lily Johannes to do exactly that. And at halftime, basically tested the temperature. And she's like, yep, it's hot. And then she threw into the game. But I agree that the second game in particular did feel like this sort of collision between a lot of young and or inexperienced players who neither can benefit from chemistry with having played together before, maybe even in the youth national team system, let alone at the senior level, against an opponent that needs to get their lick back. And we're going back to CONCACAF W Gold Cup before we even get to the Olympics, with a game that is all about experimentation. So there was 100% a lot going on. And it's worth, I think, bringing in a bit of what Emma Hayes said during the press conference after that second match, where she says, if I only prioritize short-term success, of course, I wouldn't make that many changes. But she says, I'm prioritizing the progress from expanding the playing pool to getting to see what these players look like in a really difficult match. I'm playing the long game with this, and I feel much better off for it. Now, one major difference, I would say, between the first two games was the absence of a pink-haired, flaunting flank player, Trinity Rodman.
Yeah.
How much, Meg, do you think, in terms of what she contributes on the field, but even, I mean, you could argue that Trinity now is a veteran by some definitions.
I mean, sure. Yeah. I mean, compared to that roster last night, totally. I mean, I think it is. I don't think we can talk about this current phase of the team without talking about players that aren't there, right? Because Trinity Rodman, yes, very much a factor. But you think about Sophia Wilson, who's going to be missing now for a while. Mal Swanson, we still don't have an ETA on her. Naomi Girma, in theory, should be back, I would hope, at some point this spring, right? Like, you would really, knock on wood, hope. And then Rose Lavelle still recovering. But, like, there are... I mean, that's five players that I think in any normal setting would be in the starting 11, right? And obviously we're a factor for the Olympics across this team. So I think this is a real, like, Trinity, yes, 100%, because she is the one who has been closest to availability as the year has changed over. It feels like there's a lot more weight getting put onto her. Probably not ideal for her back, but there is, I think, a real pressure. I think she's also probably getting pushed into that next star of the team role as well. So, like, there's a few factors there, but it doesn't bother me that she did not play, like, she shouldn't have played in the second game, right? Like, I was ready for her to come out after the first half in LA, just being like, what, we don't need to, like, there's no need.
Right.
There's no need right now for what this team, where the phase of this team is. So, I don't know. It is really interesting because we're seeing Emma Hayes work in pencil right now, right? As opposed to pen. And, like, really light pencil. Not even, you know, there's a lot of erasing happening, everything. So it is just, it's really fascinating to watch, but it's really hard to extrapolate, I think, even a couple months down the line because, again, we're kind of limited in the information that we have and trying to, like, take something meaningful, right, for instance, out of the PayPal game in that grander scheme of, like, where she's looking to finally lay ink down. I don't like trying to come up with that from our vantage point.
No, and there could be a case where there's, like, a very important starter like Trinity Rodman. Like, Washington might have called up and said, hey, can you use her only on the weekend and then keep her out of Tuesday's game so that she is on a full week of rest ahead of our next game, right? Like, and I think that there are certain players where, like, a club can make that request and a national team wants to honor that request because they want that player to be set up to thrive in bigger games than the second game of a back-to-back against Brazil, right? No, like... So I could also see there could be some, like, limitation on certain players' availability, specifically Trinity. But I think that that's also, you know, to Tamerra's first point, that's a testament to, like, her importance to this team. I think that the measure of a great player is if everyone around them looks better when they're on the field and maybe looks like they're working a little too hard when they're not. And I think that you really see that on the right side. I think that Yasmin Ryan actually had some really, really good movement on the ball, off the ball, still trying to kind of figure out those, like, relationships in the final third in terms of, like, to pass, to shoot, right? I think there were a couple of those, especially in the second half where...
Yeah, there's one with Claire Hutton where Claire Hutton was just... all alone.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. And stuff like that, where it's just like eventually, as these players get more confident, as they feel like they're actually in the pool and that they're not auditioning to come back, that they're actually just getting those reps, then maybe you're a little more confident to say what looks like the safer, less audacious choice in this moment is actually the smart one because I trust that my teammates will make it worth the sacrifice in the short term or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, you need to build that inherent trust. And I think right now, with all the chopping and changing over the last half year plus now, since the first camp after the Olympics, like, I just don't think that these players really look like they know what each other is going to do. And so I think that there's a lot of, when you're missing those key players like Trinity, like Wilson, Swanson, Girma, Lavelle, it shows. It really does.
Okay, I want to push back just a little bit by also introducing another winger who I think, in the absence of Trinity Rodman in the second game, did further solidify, in a way that's built off of the first game, her dependability, her reliability, probably some trust too, because when she gets the ball and she's facing goal, we all know what's going to happen. I'm talking about Alyssa Thompson.
Yeah.
Meg, do you think or let me rephrase the question. At the end of these two games, has your sort of opinion about where Alyssa Thompson can fit into this core that Emma Hayes has spoken about wanting to have articulated by the end of June has changed? I mean, she had that incredible assist to Trinity. She was threatening in a lot of ways, even on Tuesday night. Yeah. And I do think there's something to be said about the ways that players like Alyssa, who, you know, have been invited to camp, have had a bit of a tumultuous journey since she turned pro and started playing for the senior team, can step up in the absence of a Trinity Rodman on the field, much less the full triple espresso, because then it's a question of even getting on the pitch in the first place.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking when Jeff was talking, I was like, okay, but I did really like the start of what we were seeing between Alyssa Thompson and Kat Macario. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, that was where I was like, ooh, all right, let them cook for a while. Like, let's just see how this plays out. So I definitely think, you know, we talked about it on the show during the roster part. We've I think been hitting on it for a while. Like, I think we all want to have Alyssa Thompson make that jump, right? And I do think these two games, you know, Jeff, you were talking about auditions and how that can make players tense. I think Alyssa Thompson really thrived in that kind of audition phase, being in LA, being in California. She really, I mean, the LA game alone, the two of us, Tamerra and I were sitting in the press box just being like, okay, let's, okay.
Say less, but don't stop.
Right. So I do think, you know, right at the moment, in Alyssa Thompson's perfect world, she's now a starting winger. In maybe a more realistic world, depending on the status of the triple espresso line, she is the number 4, like, immediate, you know, super sub role, which is already, I think, a step up from where she was before. And I feel pretty, I mean, she is still a baby, right? Like, but I do think we are seeing her, instead of taking steps forward, she's taking bigger leaps every time she gets to the international stage. And I think that's a really easy thing to root for.
Absolutely. And I guess, like, I don't really see it as a, like, Alyssa Thompson or Trinity Rodman discussion. So, like, I don't think that this really affects the summer. It's more like we still don't know what's going on in Mel Swanson's life. And hopefully everything's okay. Truly, because, like, the silence around it gets eerie at a certain point for club, country, player side, all of it. Just the kind of, like, it's personal and we support. Like, I hope everything's okay. But in the interim, you do need a starting left winger. And I think that right now I would be very confident going into, like, an Olympic medal match, seeing a front line of Alyssa Thompson on the left and then Trinity Rodman on the right, and then either Kat Macario doing what Kat Macario's done as the number 9 the last couple of camps, and then when Sophia Wilson's back, also very confident in that 3, right? Like, I think that that's pretty straightforward. Look, like, Alyssa Thompson plays on the left for Angel City, so there's familiarity there. It's not another case of having a player play out of position, and therefore, like, it's just the decision-making, the view of the field is different, right? And I think that she doesn't turn 21 until November. So, like, you are making a play with a World Cup veteran who is also one of your, like, top prospects, who is emerging and kind of in that, like, period of her career where now she's, like you said, like, just kind of confident in this space, has seen it, has survived it, and wants to own it. So,
Jeff,
like,
I think you were in Slack last night during the game saying, she kept track of how many chances they had in the first half, like, real sicko kind of behavior. Yeah. Like, I think we're seeing even her reading of the game get much stronger. She's being, I think, a little more vocal and a little more forward-facing, too. I think there's that part of it as well. Yeah. And so, all of this really works as a cohesive step forward for her. And I do think, you know, I think a lot, when she got drafted by Angel City, a lot of people were kind of like, okay, that's a real risky bet, right? Like, we know that she's going to go to the 2023 World Cup, all of this sort of, you know, like, there's that narrative around Alyssa Thompson, but it still was seen as this risky decision. And now I do think that kind of hesitancy around her, like, that really can just be put to bed, which is exciting. Yeah,
very, very exciting.
I agree. And if you want to read more about that, in the spirit of self-promotion, I wrote a story that you can find on The Athletic about that very topic, Alyssa Thompson's journey, her rise, and the changes that she's made in terms of her confidence, in terms of the support that she's been getting from her teammates to get there. And I am struck by how different these conversations sound when we are considering the possibilities of the returns of people like Mel Swanson, Sophia Wilson, and when we look specifically at these players who were invited to camp for this window. When Emma Hayes speaks of this core, we have to assume that she's taking everyone into consideration. But I think that regardless, if we're looking at like the heat map of this core, for me, it's hottest at the back. And I'm including goalkeepers in that. Jeff, you've written extensively about the fact that there is no clear name right now for that number one goalkeeper spot. So now my question to you is, after these two games, the first played by Fallon Tullis-Joyce, who earned her first cap, clean sheet in that 2-0 victory. The second, Mandy McGlynn, 2-1. Very different games from a goalkeeping perspective. What's your assessment there?
It's tough because I think that this program has always had, like, truly, like, there have been 4 goalkeepers who have started across the 9 World Cups, and each of them won one World Cup. And they have had...
Just spoiled.
Right. 2007 is 2007. That is incredibly messy. Lessons learned. But, like, for the most part, aside from that one tournament, there was a very clear, like, the baton has passed, and now we go. And now there's no one really to grab it. And when you're rotating strikers, when you're rotating center backs, like... you usually give them a few games before you're making these like judgment calls of them, because you want to see how they play with midfielders. You want to see how they play with their teammates. With goalkeepers, it's like the loneliest position in soccer, bar none. And you're the only one who can use your hands, so you're playing a different game than everyone else on the field. And all of this to say that, like, it takes a lot of time to build that sort of comfort and familiarity for a goalkeeper, because so much of it is reliant on the 10 players in front of you making decisions that you can depend on and turn into second nature decision-making of your own. And none of the goalkeepers that we're seeing getting kind of rotated through right now, because now we're pretty much at 4 who are getting rotated through. We've had a couple of others who have made training camps and things like that, but really for the most part, it's 4. It's the 2 who started the Brazil games, Casey Murphy and Jane Campbell. Mm-hmm. And none of them have really grasped it with like a clear, like, I want to be, or like, I'm confident that I am the next player in this role. And you see, I mean, just like looking at Tuesday's performance with Mandy McGlynn, I think that when you look at like league data, when I look at, like, under the hood and I go in the underlying numbers, McGlynn probably is the best bet, is the one who profiles most like an Emma Hayes goalkeeper, who is modern in the sense of like playing out from the back, who is consistent with shot stopping, who makes some good cross claims. But then almost none of that seemed to translate into Tuesday's performance.
Yeah.
Right?
We got to talk about playing out of the back. We got
Meg, yeah. I was going to actually pivot to you with that specific question, because when I was sitting next to you in the press box at SoFi, and I'm talking now about Fallon Tullis-Joyce,
yeah.
I think distribution and playing out of the back was one area where both struggled to varying degrees, because I don't remember having my breath catch in my throat multiple times during that Saturday game the way it did on Tuesday.
No.
Yeah,
but
fair.
Yes, Meg, give me your thoughts, because I know they're strong when it comes to playing out the back and distribution.
I think what is really interesting is because of the kind of like state where the team is right now and this individual evaluation, I know that Emma Hayes wants to see these goalkeepers playing out of the back, right? And she wants to train that way, and she wants to see it in games, even though these are friendlies. But also, these are players who, like, don't play with each other, and so it looks like what it's looking like. Mm-hmm. And I'm just sitting there going, I think you have, like, maybe a 10-minute window in this game where you're like, okay, now it's time to try to play out of the back, and then you're done with it, because it is not... Totally it's just fair. Not where this team is right now. And I talked to Fallon Tullis-Joyce in the mix zone in LA. And I think, God bless her, she had a very, like, positive attitude about it, because there was that energy. One kind of, like, early bobble in the first 20 minutes, I think. But it wasn't, like, it was, I think everybody was kind of like, but it wasn't quite what we saw on Tuesday night. And she just said a game like that is going to build chemistry so much faster than anything we could ever do in training. Totally fair. So I get needing to balance these two things, these two objectives of like making sure that players are capable of having the ball at their feet, feeling comfortable, feeling good with distribution. And Emma Hayes, to your point, right, Tamerra specifically called out that's what she wants to see from Fallon Tullis-Joyce, because she low-key called out Manchester United.
Barely even low.
Like, yeah, she was just like, that's not what they're doing there, so I've got to see it here. And so that is, I think, another even additional level of, if your goalkeepers that you're pulling into this pool are not necessarily being asked to do that in their club setting, then putting them in their first cap against Brazil with a backline they've obviously never played with, what do we expect for a result out of that experiment? Because it can't be good.
And that's where it's like, if you had like your A-team defensive line in front of you,
right? If you had Naomi Girma in front of you, I'd be like, yeah, great. Cool. Yeah, let's try it. Let's see what happens. Let's get crazy.
Yeah, let's just have fun with it. But then the flip side is, now you have 3 players in that like heart of the box who are like, what am I supposed to do? Right. And it looks like it. And it shows every time, right? Like you look at like Tullis-Joyce's like launch data, and she sends the ball 35 plus yards 49% of the time with Man United. Just to put that in perspective, the average NWSL goalkeeper does 38% of the time. I know I sound like Bernie Sanders here, just giving you percentages, but it's like she is playing 11% more of her passes, 35 plus yards, than the average NWSL goalkeeper that you see. That is like an insane launch rate. So she's not doing that work. So it's going to be harder to actually get her, just to like kind of get her brain rewired that way. It's just, it's difficult. And it's a situation where, when you make those mistakes, when you have those moments where it just doesn't come off, especially something like interplay out of the back, where it's not necessarily your calling card as a goalkeeper, which is making saves, that's an issue, right? Like, and we've seen that with like Campbell in the last camp, McGlynn in this camp as well. Saves that are getting kind of punched right back into the path of opponents, right? And so that's stuff that you worry about. But when it's passing, like, it's this like self-defeating moment where it's like suddenly they're worried, they're stressed, and then their shot-stopping decision will get worse.
Yeah, and just also in the second game, I mean, Brazil was so willing to move into a high press, because I think what's also, other teams are now watching the U.S. trying to fumble around with playing out of the back, and they're like, okay, well, they're vulnerable, and especially in the second game against an opponent, I think Brazil was just like, well, we might as well go for it, because we're probably going to get something out of it.
Yeah.
And honestly, took a while to get something out of it, but that's a Brazil conversation.
Right.
It did.
Yeah.
But I do like they definitely, I think, made the U.S. more uncomfortable than the U.S. has kind of been trying to play out of the back in a while. So there is a real sense of, I think, yes, you know, they're getting good tape out of it. Sure, great, but it's just, how do you want to achieve the ultimate end result? And if you're like, I mean, I do think Emma Hayes on Tuesday night pretty much said, like, I'm not really that pressed about these results right now, right? I'm playing the long game, and so that's fine then. Like, but also, it's just, I don't know if she's putting players in an uncomfortable position or just in a position where they can't succeed right now.
Well, I'm thinking about some of the conversations that I had with players in the mixed zone after Tuesday night's game. Claire Hutton, for example, was straight up, this was the hardest game I've ever played. But on the heels of that same statement, she said, and if I can do this, I can do anything. So whoever has Kansas City next, good luck. Because a lot of these younger players, my sense is that they were extremely fired up from this camp. Not just the 2 games, but the whole experience. Giselle Thompson said something similar. She used the word confidence like several times in the couple of minutes that we had with her after the game, that just knowing that Emma Hayes had the confidence and trust in her to handle the responsibility of a team like Brazil gave her confidence. So good luck whoever has Angel City next. Even Alyssa Thompson, her older sister, said that Emma Hayes in these camps is asking the players to do things that they don't even consider doing in club. So I do think that there is an appreciation for the discomfort. You know, their own private thoughts, we may never know about how that felt. But it seems like they understand her strategy for this discomfort, for being thrown onto the frying pan and, you know, seeing who crisps and sizzles. And I'm not going to get into my food writing bag with more food metaphors, because we need to also talk about the midfield.
Speaking of a lack of sizzle.
As Jeff sips his, we'll pretend it's tea.
It's just like we'll all take a long sip of coffee.
Yes, right, let's.
Go on.
All right, we're gonna go there.
Okay.
Wow.
Meg,
7 months of this, huh? 8? 10?
That's why we had to bring you, Jeff, because we need to distribute this.
I mean, it goes back to 2023, Jeff. Let's be real.
Yeah.
I mean, it's different. It's different
right.
because it's two different head coaches. I do think there's kind of different issues at this point, but
I
I will look forward to the day where I am not actively thinking about the U.S. Women's National Team midfield the way I do right now.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, I thought Lily Johannes was really, really good, especially in that first game when she came on in the second half. Starting a game against a Brazil that has lost to you yet again was always going to be a tall order, but I thought that she did the most with it. Always there's room for improvement, but I mean, she's 17 years old. We mentioned Claire Hutton. I thought she was excellent. She played the whole 90 that second game, was on the bench in the first. Emma Hayes spoke highly of her in the post game. But we also need to talk about veterans, because I noticed that Emma found the second half of that Tuesday night game flat. She said we came out flat in the second half and we never were able to regain or sort of reverse that. And there were players like Lindsay Heaps, for example, who came on in the second half. So let's talk about it. Jeff, where do you see Heaps in this team in terms of her contributions, in terms of her veteran? Of course, she's a captain.
Yeah, right. Which makes it trickier, right? And you can't have this conversation without acknowledging the leadership component of it, because that is important, right? That is something that players seem bought in to, having her as captain as well, right? Like celebrating their first caps, their first goals, all these sorts of things, these moments, like Lindsay is like right there with them for a lot of these players, right? So a few things. One, I think that in hindsight, we maybe didn't appreciate the trio of like Ertz, Mewis, Lavelle enough in 2019, and maybe took that a bit for granted, the perfect seamless balance that all three of their profiles at that point of their careers, how well they complemented each other, is just like rare. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's kind of what we use as the like litmus test and as the like, is this working or not? That is like the most coherent midfield we've seen in recent memory with this team. With Heaps, what gets difficult is I think that her decision making actually enhances the team's performance more in a withdrawn role, but it has seemed like since she took over captaincy, since she took the 10 shirt, she wants to play as that number 10. She wants to play more advanced. She has a lot of really good, I still see like good technical decisions on the ball. I see some good decision making, again, in that middle third particularly. But once you get to the final third, I think that I'm not seeing a lot of the like unexpected from her game. I'm not seeing that sort of like clever, a defense didn't see that coming, which sometimes means a pass goes right to a defender. It sometimes means that she's running into the same place as her striker, and therefore like it gets cluttered in the box. Like, it just hasn't looked like a natural fit having her in that advanced role. And I kind of wonder if it would do, like, given how unsettled the midfield is right now, if it just makes sense to say, like, hey, this is where we need you the most, and this is where you can play with Leon. This is something that we know that you have done. Because right now, just the balance in the final third, it's like that number 10's number one job is to, like, break lines, whether it is breaking into the final third or breaking into the box. And those phases look so much more muddied right now than they have in a long time. Again, this has been going on since 23, so like I want to be careful and like say we haven't seen this. We have seen this, but that's the problem. We've seen this, and we've been seeing this, and we continue to see this. And so you have to look and, like you said, like look at the veterans, like identify what is working, what's not working. It isn't all just about new players who don't know. Sometimes it's about an established player who might be in the wrong position.
Yeah, and I think it would be one thing if I'm called to mind Alex Morgan heading into the last World Cup, and how Meg and we would have conversations about the way that she combined with Smith, now Wilson, with Swanson, with Rodman. When I sort of bring that same framework to Heaps in the midfield, it feels even more disjointed, which is definitely not the way that you want to go. But Meg, am I missing anything there? Were there any like promising moments that you saw with Heaps in the midfield, especially when it came to that second half where she came on?
It's tough because also, so I was just rewatching the second half before we started recording, mostly because I was starting to fall asleep, and I was like, let me just refresh my brain a little bit. And I mean, the moment that is sticking out to me, and I think this is where people get really frustrated with Heaps, is her willingness to go to ground, right? And I struggle watching it, and there was a moment, I think it's the 86th minute, if I recall correctly, where she goes down and just kind of like, is gesturing at the ref, and everybody else slows down because they do expect a foul to get called, and then it ends up resulting, Giselle Thompson ends up fouling a Brazilian player and like giving up a free kick really close to the goal. So
that's right.
That is, I think, one of the main, like, and an eyeball test, the thing that probably people are looking at and just being like, I would not want to run into Lindsay Heaps ever, right? Like, she is pretty muscular. I would expect her to be able to bulldoze over players, I think, in a way that, Jeff, to your point about the 2019 midfield, that combination of Ertz and Mewis especially, right? Like,
yeah, they
weren't about to go down, really.
No, they wouldn't lose
anyone.
a scrap.
And so I mean, I think, our producer Theo did point out her run she's opening up Alyssa Thompson's runs pretty well, I think, in terms of peeling off and pulling defenders with her. But I do go back even to 2023, and Kim McCauley wrote a piece for us at The Athletic about the way that Lindsay Heaps then Horan does a lot of stuff that is really hard to kind of quantify, but generally makes the team better, and I think does have that sort of more tactical mind, right, in the midfield. And I don't think that's entirely gone, but I also this has been kind of the frustration that we've had across a whole bunch of shows, is that the midfield didn't change across these two camps, right? And obviously there was real testing. But when you have the combination of Sam Coffey and Lindsay Horan, that fundamentally changes, I think, the athleticism of this midfield. And I personally, like, that's, if the positioning is correct, great, whatever. Like, I think there are ways to compensate for that, but we're not, again, Jeff, to your point, like, Horan trying to go up higher or be a little more freewheeling in terms of position-wise. Like, yeah, it opens them up to getting played through time and time again. And so I don't know, like, I still don't have an answer for it. I know that we were talking about, what is our ideal midfield. I still don't know if I have an ideal midfield, just because I don't know. I don't see the US really changing anytime soon, building around Lindsay Heaps in the midfield. I just don't see it happening. And so what positionally can you put around her? What combination can you put around her? Does that mean Sam Coffey has to go? Which I don't love.
Yeah, because depending, who else are you putting in there, right? Are you saying someone who's more withdrawn and creative, and then someone who's more, I don't know what else, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, but like, if it does become a like Heaps or Coffey, I think that the team does better with Coffey on the field right now, because I think that that's your clear six. Right.
And I just, like, I don't know, maybe this is because I'm still so trapped in that thought of the 2019 midfield where there was such a clear 6, a clear 8, a clear 10, right?
We were spoiled.
They all had such very clear, distinct roles that worked so well, and we're seeing either kind of like a double pivot 6 or an attempt at a double pivot 10 that is not actually what's happening. And I just can we get an 8 back?
Right, yeah. They miss it.
Be the title of this show.
I would love to see an 8 again. That's all I want right now. Let's just try it for a couple games and see what happens, of just someone who is a real box to box midfielder who's going to run a lot. Yeah. But I mean, who is that right now? I don't really know. Like, I'm at Sam Mewis on the field, man, every day. Like, we were so spoiled, and it is really funny because I think everybody has kind of come around. Like, everybody was freaking out about Julia Ertz not being on the team, and we all should have been way more worried about Sam Mewis.
I think you're right. It's because it's like that mix of, like, you need to be tireless, you need to have clever decision making, you have to be selfless because you have to be willing to do the stuff that's like between the boxes, right? It's in the job title. So like, we just right now, and part of it is maybe maybe what Emma and her staff are trying to do is throw players in as a 6 or a 10 to see, are you more of that creative, progressive type, or are you more of that stay-at-home type? And then we can reintroduce and kind of shift and say, you're an 8, but you do some 6 work, or you're an 8, but you do some 10 work, right?
Yeah.
You hope that's what's going on right now. Because right now, I totally agree. It's either you've had 2 planted right there, or you've had 2 right between the wingers, and then your midfield is just like begging to get like overrun in a counterattack.
That's sort of what happened. The first half felt like. Yeah.
Exactly what happened.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we were supposed to, but we ran out of time to discuss who we thought our core was going to be. But it sounds like from this conversation, we are still not totally sure. I think especially when it comes to the midfield. I will say I was impressed by Claire Hutton. I was impressed by Lily Johannes. I am very curious, and maybe this is as far as I can go right now, what their ceilings are. I'm curious what happens if they are in another camp with more playtime. They're both so young. Their ceilings are so high. And to your point, Jeff, depending on the vision that Hayes has for each of them could very much determine where they end up on the field, who they combine with. We're not even to the partnerships phase of this moment.
Yeah.
But I think that from an individual assessment perspective, despite the chaos, there is still a lot to take away from this game, especially in terms of who stood out. Is there anyone else right before we end this segment that any player that either of you, Jeff or Meg, were particularly impressed by, even if we're not talking core yet, from these 2 games?
I mean, I wrote about it in the newsletter, but I'm ready to see Fallon Tullis-Joyce in goal again. I want to see that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, again, to Jeff's point, no one's really grabbed the baton yet, and it's not an easy thing to have your first cap against Brazil. And she had a pretty solid performance, so I would like to see her get at least a couple more games before any real decision gets made.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that's the player we've seen the least in that spot, who has maybe the highest upside, who looks like looked like the most comfortable with the pressure that comes with it. Like there were moments, right? Like especially like in that first half, right? Like there were moments where you're just like, ooh, are you gonna do you need a few more games before we really get to see what you can do? But like we saw it, we started to see it in the second half, I would say, and so like totally agree with you on that. I think that this camp, there's a stat that came up in the second half that like this was that Tuesday night's game was the first time in 39 games Emily Fox hadn't stepped on the field. And I think that she's someone who gets overlooked a lot in terms of this core. I would put her like second or third in my core 4 at this point. She's very much on Mount Rushmore before I'm figuring out spacing and who fills in the gaps or anything like that. Like, especially now that Tierna Davidson is injured, and hopefully that's a smooth recovery process, and hopefully everything goes well on that side of it. But you're dropping defenders, and left back continues to look like a major issue. And that is when we've seen Neiswanger and Dung starting in spots that they have had in past years, which is very concerning. So I think having that stability at right back and her interplay with Trinity on the right side as well actually unlocks like the best in each other's game. So like really, like unfortunately, it's kind of one of those like strength emphasized by absence moments. But Emily Fox has become very, very important to this national team.
All right, that's our pseudo core. We can revisit this conversation, and I'm sure a lot of you have many thoughts, so feel free to reach out to us with your thoughts, your feelings, your opinions about these 2 friendlies against Brazil. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us and for lending both an ear and a brain. We really appreciate it, and I'm sure it's just a matter of time before we have you back on the show.
Looking forward to it already. Thank you.
So those were very comprehensive, I think, in terms of the discussion that they prompt, as we just experienced with Jeff. Friendlies, wouldn't you say, Meg?
Yeah, 100%. I didn't think I was going to rant so much on this episode, but here we are.
Sometimes you don't know how long you've been holding something, like your thoughts about distribution from the back, until you're asked. So hopefully you're feeling a little bit lighter. Hopefully you listeners are feeling a little bit lighter, because there was a lot of newness, a lot of experimentation, as Emma Hayes has said, throughout the couple of weeks leading up to these games. And there will be more, because the U.S. next will be playing a doubleheader against China. Then they face the Republic of Ireland, a one-off against Canada later this spring for us all to look forward to. And of course, you can trust that we will be breaking down as much as we possibly can on these full-time podcasts. Now, did you know that The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to provide free, best-in-class coverage of women's sports? If not, make sure that you check out the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. Mouthful, yes, but don't worry, we're going to put a link to that in the show notes. All right, that's our show. Thank you so much for listening as always. I am Tamerra Griffin, and I will be squeezing in power naps whenever I can. And that will not be on Instagram or Blue Sky, but you can find me there when I'm awake.
I'm Meg Linehan, also on Instagram and Blue Sky. Also, we couldn't even get into it because of how long we went on the U.S. I did sit down with Michelle Kang while out in Los Angeles. Also have an interview coming with Billie Jean King, who I also sat down with out in Los Angeles. So a lot happened beyond the U.S. Women's National Team, but we wanted to keep you focused on that. Yeah.
I love it. This show is not possible without our podcast producer, Theo Lloyd Hughes, our video producer, Leah Griffin, and our executive producer, Emily Olson. Again, we appreciate each and every one of you who takes time to listen to this show, share your thoughts and feelings with us, following us on all the platforms. We appreciate you. Thank you so much, and we will see you soon.